Welcome to the Yalla podcast, episode 7. And today we have with us Yuval Man. My name is Alon.
I'm Alec.
And Yuval, please tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we will start the conversation.
Hi, it's good to be here. I'm Yuval. At the moment, I write, make videos, podcasts in the space between sexuality, relational intelligence, and artistry, as well as collective liberation. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, Alec, you want to say just a few words about this podcast, and then we will start the conversation.
Yeah. So me and Alon were both like anti-Zionists, and we live in Israel, Palestine. And we talk to many people about the subject of anti-Zionism, anti-colonialism. And I came to your videos, and I must say personally that it really helped me to come out of the closet when I saw one of your videos as an anti-Zionist. And it's still a process for me, and every time I see what you do, it gives me like more courage to. I'm already speaking out, but I feel it's not like, one shot. And like I heard also the interview you did with how it's called, the Empire? No, like with this ex-military guy, the American one, the veteran.
Oh yeah, Greg, colonial.
Yeah, colonial outcast.
His name is Greg Stoker, right?
Yeah, he's really good.
Yeah.
But I would still like to hear about more a bit how you got to be an anti-Zionist, and also we talk a lot about like how much we're disappointed from the spiritual community and the psychedelic community and all this stuff in here and generally in the world, like how it's like unpolitical and how it's like serving the powers that be because of its insistence to be apolitical. So this is a big subject, that we wanted to talk about.
Yeah. First of all, I think it's pretty beautiful that, I don't always feel like I'm at my A game. Sometimes I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, this world, this life. And then hearing that just this impulse that I had to start being more public about my journey, spark other people on the struggle to do the same. And I just can't imagine the ripple effect that each of us that chooses to turn their life into collective liberation as an aim, each of us in our own way, each of us in our own unique flavor, but it just like sparks joy in me, because I'm like, okay, it has an effect. Most of it I'll never see. I mean, it's interesting to talk about my journey as an anti-Zionist Jew, because I feel like I've never been a Zionist, really, because it's just a made-up arbitrary identity.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, I haven't been a Zionist even when I was in the IDF. Pretty clearly and outspokenly as well. I was like, I don't think that what is happening is right, like. I didn't have the political context that I have right now. I didn't have the knowledge that I have right now. I didn't have the prowess that I have right now. But I was always like, this is all like a strange, bizarre game. Who gives a fuck? You know what I mean? Like, why am I here with these uniforms, and these people, the Palestinian people, are coming every morning to my checkpoints to be checked at like 4 a.m. Like, it just never made sense.
So you actually served at checkpoints?
Yeah.
So can you explain a little bit to the audience? Maybe they're not aware of what goes on in the Israeli military. What was your position? What was your job?
Yeah, so I find myself in an unfortunate reality of being sent to artillery, which is, to those of you who never been to the army, let alone Israeli army, Usually there are like the special units, which is usually more intelligent people, whether it's like people who work in intelligence or people who just go like special operations and stuff. And then there is all the kind of, garbage juice of like all the least educated, least interesting, most racist people, basically, that end up in it's called Gdudim, brigades.
Yes, brigade.
And I contested going there, but I had no choice because my eyesight was not super good. So I couldn't go to any interesting, brainy special units. And for some reason, I didn't feel like it was an option for me to not go at all, which was ideally what I really wanted. Because I was 18 and afraid to go to jail, and yeah, so I ended up in artillery. And I think there was maybe 6 months to a year in my entire service that I was actually in checkpoints in the West Bank, in the area of somewhere in East Jerusalem, between a few settlements, Jewish settlements and Palestinian villages. And in there, I think I started having the most, I don't know if started, because I grew up next to pretty extreme settlers in my family. So I saw and was appalled by the reality that they are inflicting on Palestinians way before that. But I think it was like...
Tell a little bit where you grew up in Palestine, Israel, geographically, and what that meant.
Yeah, I was born in El Quds, in Jerusalem.
Yes.
And we lived in Tel Aviv, Givatayim, more like. But nobody knows what Givatayim is, Tel Aviv.
Yeah, Tel Aviv.
Yeah. Two liberal hippie parents who were into spirituality and psychedelics and new age gurus and so on. And then when I was 10, we became ultra orthodox. So from like democratic Waldorf school, this alternative school with no curriculum and teachers, they sent me straight to the Cheder, which is like boys only ultra orthodox school.
Yes.
It was a very strange kind of movement. On my mom's side, there is many settlers. So like ranging from like very neoliberal settlers in like more established settlements in the West Bank to really what's called like the hill youth, which is basically very extreme settlers who are into like conquering hills and purging Palestinian villages and causing damage. And as we see unfold right now, this has been going on for many years. It hasn't started in October 7th.
Yes.
And so I remember having like not direct uncles, but like uncles in marriage.
Yes.
That were like conquering hillsides and like talking about being extremely violent, planning all kinds of violence against settlers. And I always was incredibly distraught and appalled by it. I even told in one of my videos this story when I think I was like maybe 12, maybe. I was walking in the Muslim quarter in the old city of Jerusalem next to one of my settler cousins. He was also my age, maybe like a year or two before. And we were walking around when he just suddenly sprinted and kicked a Palestinian boy in the balls.
Wow.
And disappeared into the small streets. And I remember like being incredibly shocked. First of all, I was really afraid because I'm alone in the middle of the Muslim quarter, and I was afraid that somehow I managed to go back to my grandparents' house, who live still live in the Jewish quarter.
Yes.
I don't remember the conversations that I had with him after that or ever since, but it was a very monumental event for me. I was like, whoa. It kind of like started waking me up to like the reality.
But
I think it was only... What is it?
Your parents didn't tell you anything, like they had no political opinion to either side?
So I think when we were secular, I mean, I was pretty young, so I think it was like this. No, if I go by my father's parents, for example, I imagine that they had very similar worldviews, which is like this new normal neoliberal, privileged kind of like, there was a war, we won, hey, independence, whatever.
It's the
but
usual
also,
narrative that
yeah, but we
everybody knows
also
by
we
now.
don't want Palestinians to suffer, whatever. What it is what it is, kind of vibe, you know.
Mhm.
I think when they became ultra religious and still are, they are not Zionists because the ultra Orthodox community is technically anti-Zionist, although unlike one very small constituency, which is like the very extreme Hasidic group of Neturei Karta that live in Jerusalem, the majority of the ultra-Orthodox community still participate in the government, have a lot of control over things, you know, receive benefits from the government. So they are pretty Zionist. But in ideal, because in Judaism, Jews are not supposed to have a state of their own until the third temple.
So they need to leave it to God, right? This is
Exactly
the reason that they are
so
not
they are not Zionists, but they are deeply racist and supremacists for like religious reasons.
Yes.
So they hate Arabs and Palestinians just because they are not Jewish. You know, like my partner is not Jewish, and they refused to meet her when we visited Israel last because she's a Gentile. You know, so that's the kind of environment that I grew up in.
So this is a kind of point that Elik and I sometimes talk about, that it seems like the only thing that's really keeping Jewish Israeli society together is basically the hatred for Palestinians. Like you see that for two very different reasons, secular Zionists and ultra-Orthodox Jews who are technically not Zionists, as you say, they come together, but what do they agree about? They agree about their racist hatred for
and the overall delusional sense of supremacy over everybody.
Yes.
And you can see it in like liberal secular Israelis who believe like we are these like smarter, more technologically advanced, more whatever. And then the Jewish believe that we are obviously like the God's chosen people and all that, but it's ultimately the same. It's the same delusion of grandeur, you know?
But you think it's part of the Jewish religion, this supremacy thing, or?
No.
So why do you think the ultra-Orthodox Jews here adopted this worldview? What made them, if it's not an integral part of Judaism, why is it so?
ואתה בחרתנו מכל העמים, and you know, you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
this.
I mean,
So this means that God chosen the Jewish people out of all people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it technically exists in the texts, but I think if you go a little bit deeper, which is important when it comes to any religious text, because the religious text itself is not objective. It really depends on interpretation. Just like if you go to any religious text, you can take from it, all people use it for justify all kinds of bizarre and hazardous things because it's their interpretation. So I think if you go to the interpretation of what that actually means, if you go to, for example, Jewish mysticism, which is really the kind of part of Judaism that was largely busy in finding deeper mystical meanings to a lot of the interpretations to the original texts. So the idea is basically that the Jewish people it's not about a dominative hierarchy of better than anybody else, but rather actually have this very unique responsibility for the world, very specific job that they are meant to do here, which is, according to Jewish mysticism, the light of the divine light of God, basically, which is very much corroborated with many other wisdom traditions and mystical traditions, has been spread into all of these seemingly separated things. And the work of the Jewish people, by doing the mitzvot, by doing the commandments, and living in a right way, is to collect these pieces of light and bring back the divine light into this world. That's basically it. Which very much sounds like any other mystical kind of tradition of like the enlightened ones who wants to come here to it has nothing to do about conquest. It has nothing to do about land ownership. It has nothing to do about hierarchy of domination or being smarter or better than anybody else. According to Judaism, all of the commandments of Jewish people, which are very, very hard to like keep if you really go full in for it. It's more of a responsibility. Like the rest of the world, they have, according to Judaism, their own things, which is basically like very simple kind of commandments of like don't steal, don't murder, stuff like that. But they are not obligated to do all the other Jewish stuff. But it's not a matter of we are better, they have no soul. All these kind of things, I feel like they are influences from Christianity, from other mythologies that Jewish people grew around, from Zionism. It's all kinds of different things that kind of influence Jewish thoughts. And yeah, I personally haven't found anywhere in actual Jewish tradition this sense of like chosen people or being superior to anybody else.
So this brings a thought to my mind that I've pondered in other contexts, and now I see it here, that Zionism and maybe all cults and ideologies, they kind of take things that could be beautiful, that could be positive, and they corrupt them, they use them. They, of course, make them superficial to begin with, because otherwise you cannot do this. And then they try to take advantage of them for their own nefarious goals. Do you see this process here? And maybe even you can tell it in a more detailed way if this is indeed true?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, Zionism is originally not a Jewish movement. It's a very anti-Semitic movement. And I'm talking political Zionism, which is an important distinction because Zionism as a longing for Holy Land has always existed in Jewish thought, but it was never about conquest and definitely not national pride, because for the majority of Jewish history, nation states didn't exist.
Yeah.
So political Zionism is basically an anti-Semitic, largely not even Jewish, European imperialist, colonialist influenced, entirely made up sense of collective Jewish identity, which didn't exist before. Like there was Jews, but in terms of like Jews being prosecuted, it was largely a European thing.
Yes.
Jews living in many other places who've never experienced any persecution, or at least not more persecution than any other kind of minority group. So in no way something as meaningful and, you know, as happened in Europe. And so, you know, back then, there was no, before political Zionism, Jewish people from Ethiopia and Jewish people from Morocco and Jewish people from Germany had absolutely nothing to do with each other. It's an entirely different culture, entirely different external, manifestation, like clothes and, rituals and traditions. It's people who saw, like, different Jewish people based on wherever they live. They saw them as part of where they live, just like, you have many different ethnic groups and religious groups in many other countries that see themselves as citizens of that particular country. So were Jews. And then political Zionism came and basically fabricated this notion of collective Jewish national pride and identity.
Yes, in the Zionist ethos, it's called the melting pot. They bring all the Jews from all over the world to here, to Israel, and this is the melting pot of all the different Jews into one culture, right?
Yeah.
This is part of the...
And of course, they use the Bible, not because they are religious. They use the Bible because you need some religious text in order to justify all the horrific shit that you're about to do. Mm-hmm. Of course, they completely ignore the thousands of years of Jewish history of coexistence. And, for example, my ancestors who lived for thousands of years, places like Safed, kind of like a cornerstone of Jewish mysticism and the development of rabbinical Jews from the beginning of the first century and on, completely ignore all these parts in which people like my great-great-great-grandfather who spoke Arabic and lived in a largely Muslim village and saw himself as a Palestinian probably, completely ignore this entire thing, completely ignore the vast Jewish tradition of resistance to oppression from the first century, people like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is still celebrated in Meron every year.
Yes.
Who had to hide in a cave for 20 years because he resisted the Roman occupation. But no, let's go all the way to this one time in the Bible in which we conquered some other nations, which is, by the way, probably entirely a myth, because there is no finding corroborated that story of Jewish people ever existing or going out of Egypt as from slavery.
Yeah.
But of course, let's only take that part that happened thousands of years ago and then claim ownership over this land in which millions of people live on. Like, that's absolutely insane, you know?
What I don't understand, how non-religious people still, like, when I talk to my father, like, I say, okay, say your racism out loud. You don't want to live as an equal with Palestinians, but you really believe in this myth that justifies it. It's like, you know, like I feel
They don't.
it's
They don't.
They don't, right?
They don't.
Yeah.
They just don't. They just. It depends on which social, where they are at place in the social hierarchy. If they are like white Ashkenazi Jews in like with upward mobility from upper middle class, they just don't give a fuck. They just don't care. They want to preserve their privilege, and that's it. You know, I had friends who've considered themselves Marxists and leftists, and actually did something about it, not just in ideology. Like, I have a friend who refused to go to reserves, who did protective missions in the West Bank, who I had conversations with him in the living room on the fabrication of the Zionist project, the occupation, the existence of, like, all this kind of stuff. So I know that he knows. We spoke about the things like the so-called two-states peace process solution, and how it was all just like a made-up thing just to keep face for the world and so on. So I know that he knows. Come October 7th, and the guy is talking with me about volunteering to go and fight in the IDF. And I contemplated that a lot.
Wow.
And eventually I came to see, among many other things that have contributed to this thing, which is, generational trauma and a sense of fabricated sense of existential threat, which doesn't really exist for Israelis and so on. But what I realized is that over the years, he made a lot of money.
Yeah.
And bought real estate, and started accumulating more wealth. And I'm not just talking about one friend. This is like a lot of people that I know. Yeah, I'm just giving one example out of my head, but it's like a lot of people. Suddenly they have wealth, all stored and invested in all kinds of assets in Israel. And of course, like, what do you do now if Palestinians have a right to return? Do I need to give them the house? Like, what is going to happen? Like,
so I want to ask you about this a little bit more, because I also had similar experiences that you described with people that I thought were actual leftists, with people who I thought understood the situation, and then came October 7th and everything flipped almost immediately. And I'm still trying to understand what the hell is going on here. And what I hear you saying is this is nothing but an attempt to protect their material advantages. And yes, maybe that is true, but my question is, how do they justify it to themselves? I've thought about this, and I don't, like, what is happening in the mind of someone who has this, this contradiction inside their minds all the time? Or how do you make sense of this?
I'm still figuring it out. But I think that, among all the psychoanalysis that we can do around this kind of weird phenomena, I think ultimately it's the realization that we human beings are capable of contradictions. Like, we are irrational animals, which is a lot of times something that I think about when people talk about dehumanization, as if it's like a bad thing, which it is, but only in the context in which humans have supremacy over nature and other species. Ultimately, we are all animals. It's not something that's supposed to make you behave less humanely or less righteously towards beings. The fact that they are not humans but animals, right? But anyway, as animals, we're irrational, emotional, needy beings, and I think that triumph over our rationale. It triumph over critical thinking. It triumph over a lot of things often. And it's not the first time that we see it. I'm sure that a lot of people in Nazi Germany have felt the same. They bought into the manufactured sense of existential threats. Got lost in the sauce.
So a follow-up question. If I start thinking this way, I find myself very easily falling into pessimism, because this it almost immediately follows that there is no hope. So the almost is the part I want to put emphasis on. And my question to you is, do you think that there is a way to acknowledge this reality and still believe that there is a place for improvement? And if so, where can this come from? How can we really improve the situation, acknowledging this reality?
Yeah, for me, it's not a pacifistic view. It's just a realistic view. And what gives me hope in all of this is that the same tendency to be beings of feelings and needing is also what makes us alive. It's also what drives us to create art and beauty and to care for each other and to care for things around us and to feel empathy and compassion. It's the same coin, It's just a matter of, where is it being turned? So I don't see that tendency of human beings is necessarily like all doom and gloom, and it means that all of us will be that. It doesn't mean that we are inherently that. It just means that we are inherently irrational beings. Now, what are we doing about that? To me, it's not. I don't think that being irrational animals is a negative thing. I think it's just something that we need to acknowledge, to come back to what we really are inherently, to come back to this feeling, sensing, life vibrating, creative being, And so I don't know. It's to me, it's neither good nor bad. It's just what we are, and it can have all kinds of expressions,
So the way I think about it is that maybe there are different tendencies, like natural tendencies to us as animals. And maybe one of those tendencies is to also think rationally. And so, yes, we are irrational in some sense, but we are also rational. We also can operate our minds. And maybe if we find a way to make these two levels of existence work together, maybe that will be an opening for something more positive.
I also wanted, maybe it takes to the spiritual subject that I wanted to talk with you a bit, because I feel like that, to me, like being able to see kind of the brainwash and the ability to look at Zionism from above does have to do with the fact that I'm doing a lot of like spiritual conscious work. But I see, on the other hand, that many people doing it and they don't come to this result. But I feel like the spirituality, maybe it's this, it has this connection with rational, like it cannot stand on rationality alone to liberate yourself from, I don't know, oppressive ideologies. But I wonder, what is your take on this? Like,
I think that the word spirituality is maybe became or was rendered a bit meaningless, because it can mean so many different things. So maybe we can be more specific. Maybe we're talking about faith, or aligning with the highest values that we can, imagine. Or opening up to realities that are beyond the seen, physical, rational reality that we can perceive with our immediate senses. Or maybe for some people, it's opening up to, myth, imagination, creativity. So it can be all kinds of things.
Yeah, it could be many things.
When I speak about the kind of conversion of spirituality and liberation work and activism, for me, it's the realization that if a practice, any practice from any wisdom tradition, if you go to all the wisdom traditions, whether we are talking about, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, mysticism, we are talking about Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, whatever. Ultimately, it's all about liberation. Right? Like it's usually speaking about personal liberation, like how do you get enlightened? How do you, liberate yourself? But it's personal liberation and collective liberation is all the same, because if you, let's say, meditate or had a mystical experience or did psychedelics or whatever was the particular tool that you've been using, and you reach this place in which you see beyond your limited identity of being this egocentric human with this particular, you see this as something that can be observed, and therefore there is more than that. Maybe you recognize that you are connected and intimately intertwined with all other things. Maybe you saw the essence of consciousness or awareness that was able to witness your own thoughts. So you stop identifying with your own thoughts and your own beliefs and so on. All these kind of things tend to happen. Then you realize that egocentric sense, that there is such a thing to be identified with something that is limited, that is an approximation. You realize that your body is not really anything that you can point at that is separated and individually existing outside of everything else. And so as your name, your occupation, your thoughts, your feelings, your everything, you recognize that connection. And to me, if the practice didn't get you there, then it's only a way to get high, or a way to get dissociated, or to cope with the difficult reality, which I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing. Like life, as the first truth of Buddhism says, life is suffering. Life is, being alive is a tension point that is often pretty painful, pretty hard. Dealing with loss, dealing with all of our tender vulnerabilities, contemplating our own mortality, like things that are incredibly difficult. So
yes, and being separated. Our ego is by definition separated from the rest of reality.
Yeah. I mean, it creates a perception of separation.
Yes.
And then you have all the systems of oppression that operate on you, and all the life struggles that have been created by humans. And I don't blame people for wanting to escape. But at the same time, I want to invite people in to contemplate of why they even meditate, or why they even have their altar or a prayer or any kind of contemplative spiritual practice. Because ultimately, it's there not to just help you cope and have you blissed out. Because, feeling bliss and inner peace is fucking great. It's just not the ultimate reason why you sit here and meditate. It can't be. And if it is, then you're just using spirituality to uphold a certain level of detachment from the world suffering. And if anyone who goes beyond the whitewashed, limited, appropriated version of some of the original wisdom traditions that is available as a buffet in Western civilization, if you go a little bit deeper and you look to the original tradition that ideas came from, you always see this collective liberation everywhere. The whole point of having a spiritual practice is you can be in service to other people. What is that if not activism? You know what I mean? And so people take only the kirtan and the singing mantras and getting blissed out, but not the service part, which is feeding the hungry, alleviating suffering in the world, advocating for the oppressed. No.
So I want to press this point a little bit more, because it's something that has been bothering me ever since October 7th, very much, but even before it, because both Elik and I were very much inside the let's call it spiritual community in Israel, okay? And I think we're both disappointed, and especially now we are disappointed because we see all these people around us just supporting a genocide. And what can be worse than that? I don't know. Okay, so I still do not understand why it happens that so many people proclaim themselves to be in search of something, that is deep, that is connected, that is loving, that is positive, that is peaceful. And then they fall again and again and again into these traps of tribalism, of individualism, of superficiality. And my question to you is, why do you think this happens, and how can we avoid it? And maybe how can we identify that this is that other people are doing it and not fall into the beautiful language that they speak, and also how to identify it on ourselves and avoid this pitfall.
I want to add that I fell for it myself.
Yes, we both fell for it. We both fell for it for years.
When I was into it, I remember I was coming back from some ceremony, and there was a demonstration against the occupation in Jerusalem, and I felt like I just don't want to take any part of it. I want to talk about self-love, to hug my inner child, and then now I'm kind of, it happened to me before the 7th of October that I pushed all this away, and now I'm trying to see if there's a way to integrate those stuff together, but I don't know, actually. I don't like.
Yeah, I feel you completely, and I think the way I'm thinking about it at the moment, which is always in flux and always developing, is that the sense of identity is this like movable, expanding kind of thing, So if you grow out from a very egocentric identity to something that is a little bit more than that, so you start noticing the people around you, you care for your family, you care for your friends, you care for your nation or whatever, and you keep expanding that sense of identity. And a lot of us, and all of us in certain moments, have a certain cap, a certain limitation on how far we can expand identity, how much and how many we can include in that identity and feel the interconnectedness towards and include in our love. And I feel like in let's call it new age kind of Western spirituality, it's like, it exists and it's so widespread. So I think it has a need. It's fulfilling a certain need of deeper, more meaningful relationality with life that comes from this existential dread that is inevitable in consumeristic, capitalistic, patriarchal, hierarchical kind of society.
Yes.
It's just that it didn't go far enough. Mm-hmm. It went far enough to be like, okay, you know what I mean? Like life is not just consuming things. Mm-hmm. We can also consume spiritual things. So we don't have to consume cars only and beautiful houses and sexual partners. We can also consume blissful experiences. We can also consume inner peace. We can also consume a sense of sweetness of love. But it didn't go far enough to be able to see what love actually is, which is holding all of it in it, holding the pain, holding the ugliness, holding the beauty, holding the everything, holding death, holding life. Like it's an entirely more expansive sense of identity. So I feel like it's not that it's not needed. I think that it's important that people have a place to go to feel some peace in the middle of this chaos. Yes. And at the same time, it should continue developing and expanding. It should appropriate original, indigenous, and wisdom traditions a bit less and be a bit more discerning, and try to be more open, not just to the particular ideas from the tradition that make sense and make me feel good in my current state of being, but also the things that challenge my perspective, also the things that makes me include more groups of people that see suffering in the world and care. that make me reimagine my relationship with death and dying. And so it's not something new as much as a remembrance of what's already there. It's just the discernment and the developing this good sense of judgment of not everything that fashionably look spiritual is deep, meaningful, grounded wisdom. And you can know if it's grounded wisdom, a grounded teacher, a grounded spiritual practice, if it takes you all the way.
So how do you know that it's all the way? How do you recognize it?
I mean, there are no binaries. It's a process.
Of course,
we
of course.
all somewhere in the evolutionary process, right? But to me, some of the things that I'm looking for is, first of all, see the lineage. Like where does this come from, right? So for example, like just take one example that I love to talk about is mindfulness, right? The whole idea of mindfulness comes from Buddhism, from Zen Buddhism and other forms of Buddhism, around becoming more aware of one's bodily sensations, of one's thoughts, of the different between thoughts and all this kind of stuff. Now, there is a beautiful book called Make Mindfulness, which explore this idea of like.
Can you say the title again, please?
Make Mindfulness.
Make mindfulness.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, like McDonald's. So
yes.
Okay, yeah. I get it now. Okay.
Which is basically, you see this phenomena of taking.
Yes. 1 second, Yuval. We need to correct the focus of the camera. I'll try to do it. 1 second.
No worries. Maybe because you're two.
I think
אולי יש משהו מרוח. כן, טוב, נוציא את זה בעריכה.
עובד?
נראה לי...
Looks better to me, no?
עדיין לא מושלם, שנייה.
It's not, it's...
יותר טוב, שנייה אחת, אני אסגור מחדש את הדלת. תתחיל ממשהו כמו So this book make mindfulness ותספר עליו, ואז נערוך החוצה את התקלה.
Yeah, there is this phenomena, make mindfulness, I like to call it. There's also a book in this name, which is basically exploring this whole phenomena of taking one particular idea or one set of ideas out of a far more complex, multidimensional, and vast body of knowledge in a wisdom tradition like Buddhism in this case, completely ignoring the mystical, philosophic, cultural, mythological, cosmological kind of systems of thoughts and communal accountability that exist in Buddhism, and only focusing on this, like focusing the techniques of focusing the mind and so on and so forth.
Yes, making
what it creates is like, what?
Making it superficial, making it
so
practical.
Yeah, and in that sense, okay, it can bring a lot of benefits to people's life. No one can recount that. And at the same time, it can create all kinds of ungrounded, unbeneficial, and sometimes harmful phenomena. Like, for example, corporations that now integrate mindfulness practices in their workspace, instead of addressing very important things that have to do with the harmful behaviors and the co-working environment that workers needs to be part of, and addressing all these like dominative hierarchies.
The basic structure of hierarchy that
we can make more effective workers, but making them meditate and be more focused and mindful. And you also have all kinds of accounts of
Misappropriation, you know this guy?
Yeah, I was just about to mention that. Like, there's this mindfulness teacher guy, Nissim Amon, that made this video also about like addressing IDF soldiers of how to be emotionless and like, be mindful in like, basically making them Nazi killer machines that are also mindful.
Mindful killing machines.
Yeah. Yes. But if you go to the original tradition, Buddhism is deeply, deeply versed in collective liberation, that have been multiple accounts of Buddhist monks that lit themselves on fire in protests of oppression.
Yeah, they suffered for deep oppression by the Chinese, right, in Tibet, and
yeah.
So this is very reminiscent of what we talked about a little bit before, the bastardization of the Jewish tradition for this system of Zionism. So we see it all around. Yes, and I want to also ask you about like the other side of this, because you were speaking about how removing politics and collective liberation from spirituality makes it superficial. But I also feel like, so I was political from a young age, and something in the New Age spiritual movement attracted me. And now that I think about it, I see that the politics, like the leftist politics, the groups of leftist politics lacked something. And they lacked, for example, like to be very practical, they lacked hugging. No one hugged there, and no one talked personally, and no one talked, about like just about love, about feelings, about emotions, about like
yeah, because we're all for the cause, so what you feel doesn't matter so much. Like I feel I miss the feeling that somebody sees me and that my feelings are still important. And now I feel I kind of go, like for me it's always this, jumping back and forth from like I'm the only thing that's important and all I do is heal my personal trauma and deal with relation, to push that all away and we're completely for the cause, and like there's some
and I think when you do political activism in a way that is impersonal, it also becomes superficial in some sense, right? So how do we avoid that, right? That's the other side of it.
Yeah, I this is something that I feel deeply about, and I feel like it becomes like a center focal point in my own practice, and also what I like to speak about and write about. And you mentioned really beautifully that there is this like deep connection between the bastardization of Jewish tradition and Jewish mysticism by Zionism, and in the same way, in a very similar way, there is this robbery of original indigenous wisdom traditions that are grounded in multidimensional, multifaceted, liberatory oriented, into this like buffet of spiritual spiritual wisdom to consume. And I think it's very much related. And at the same time, like I mentioned before, the longing for something deeper is something that is inherent to all of us. There is a reason why human beings have always invented mythologies and stories. The fact that these mythologies are sometimes being used to oppress does not negate the original inherent need to align ourselves and our actions and our thoughts with things that are beyond comprehension, with like greater powers. It's just that we have to be aware of how are we doing that. And luckily, we have thousands of years of magnificently deep and magnificently evolved traditions that give us all kinds of profound tools and profound ways to do just that, to behave in the world from this impersonal way that understand ones as an interconnected phenomena of an expression of aliveness, and at the same time that cares deeply for the well-being and flourishing of the whole. And I feel like that is possible. We just need to go to look deeper, to look beyond the superficial in all sides. And also, like you mentioned, there is the same kind of spiritual bankruptcy in a lot of the activist leftist quadrant of the leftist meme, because it negates. It's often secular, atheistic, kind of like the negation of any greater power. And I think that is going directly against some of our inherent longing and desire for connecting with something that we can't fully comprehend, this poetic gesture that exists in all of life, this striving to connect, to create synergy, relationships of synergy that produce more life without knowing what is going to happen there, completely playfully, completely vulnerably. And it exists everywhere. And it exists in us as well. And that poetic gesture, that poetic longing is, I think, what drives us to look for something that is a bit deeper. The question is, how do we do that?
This reminds me of like Marxists who try to prescribe how society should look, right? And these people get a lot of resistance, and I think this is justified because they try to like say, yes, this is the way that we will technically solve all the problems of humanity and the world. And as you say, I think this is as superficial as the other things that we talked about. This is again a bastardization, right?
Yeah, if we listen to some beautiful indigenous traditions, for example, I mean, you can't generalize on indigenous Native American tribes because there were more than 600 of them, but there was like a pretty much a overarching mythology of how Turtle Island was created. And
how, excuse me?
Turtle Island, which is the United States. This is how the native people call it, Turtle Island.
Okay, I was not aware of this myth at all. So can you please tell a few words about this?
It's just the way that it's been, the United States has been called before it was colonized and was the United States. It was the Turtle Island of the people.
I didn't know this.
There are a bunch of mythologies around it, but like there is one that they call the Lady of the Sky, which is, I don't know it in its entirety, but it was basically a lady that came from the sky realm and started planting seeds. And this is how Turtle Island came to be this incredibly luscious, green, and abundant place. Compare that with some more Western kind of mythologies like Adam and Eve, for example.
Yeah,
that is all about this like scene, and like the woman, the Eve ate the apple and then was condemned to live a life of suffering and labor and all that stuff. And you know, you look at how indigenous traditions who lived in reciprocal ways with land, with life, with the world, and how they believed and saw human beings, the human race, as the little brothers of nature. You know, this like very recent kind of very, it's like a toddler who just came into the world, and they looked for their environment for a lot more ancient species of trees, of plants, of other animals for wisdom, because they were like, you guys, you've been here a lot longer than us. Let's learn from what you have to teach.
Sometimes I feel like trees are so ancient. I feel like trees are creatures that just meditated for thousands of years, and then they just became this thing that doesn't really care what you do to it. Like it just allows you to do anything you want to it. And this is in some sense a higher form of being than this, you know, this.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's all this Western enlightenment that positions humans and human intelligence, and especially above all else, as if this reality hasn't existed and was unfolded in magnificently, infinitely intelligent ways far before we were even conceptualized.
Billions of years before.
And so why is it so far out that we can look to the tree and how the fungi moves nutrition between things, and how trees store water and live in reciprocal communities of mutual care? Why can't we learn from them, you know? So I think this is where I feel like a lot of the leftist kind of quadrant or meme is missing a lot of this spiritual depth of like, okay, it's not enough to say what we don't want, and it's definitely not our place to have the arrogance to think that we, as the ones who created all these systems of oppression, can now know exactly how to fix it. Or perhaps as we move towards abolishing things that don't serve us anymore, maybe we can open up to better, deeper, higher forms of intelligence, whether it's from ancient traditions in our own, species and other species, to see what else is possible. Maybe it's not our job to figure it out or fix the world, but rather become a more active, reciprocal stewards and participants in the aliveness, right? A more humble.
If I may, I see what we're talking about as a process of liberating ourselves from a sense of supremacy. And this is what we're talking about, right? Supremacy, all in so many different aspects. And what we're talking about now is the sense that humans are above everything else and above all nature. And if we liberate ourselves from this sense of supremacy, then maybe this would give a small opening to true liberation and not the fake liberation that we were talking about.
And if you actually meditate or do any other, kind of spiritual practice, and you actually contemplate a bit more deeply or go into the tradition that it came from, you see that that's exactly the point. You meditate so you can see your own ego as a fabrication, not really as maybe a beautiful map of meaning to move in this world and create beautiful things, but by no means some kind of ultimate intelligence, because the majority of the thoughts that I have are completely irrelevant, fabricated, strange stories that have nothing to do with nothing.
And they're not your own also. They came from, like...
Yeah,
exactly.
We call it dance of different things around the cosmos.
Exactly. So what do I do with that? Do I just tune out of it and sit blissfully? Or do I recognize that, oh, wait, maybe that's just a very limited and one of infinite forms of intelligence?
Yes, yes. And I want to ask you something very, very pragmatic, because I see myself now as maybe a representation of a large part of our audience, and I feel very ignorant about these ideas that you talk about, these indigenous traditions. And what I find myself asking is, where do I find this? Where do I read about this? Where do I learn about this? Just on a very, immediate and pragmatical level, can you give us some points to start from?
I mean, something that comes right off the bat, because I'm right now in the middle of it, is books like Braiding Sweetgrass. Talks a lot about just this a conversion of indigenous knowledge, science, and poetry.
Can you say the name of the book again? Because I didn't catch it.
Braiding Sweetgrass.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe after you send us, and
yes, you will send us a link, and we will put it maybe just to Wikipedia. Even this is a starting point.
And also, when I'm saying indigenous traditions, I'm not only speaking about this particular version that most people think about when we say indigenous traditions, which is like Native American traditions, but just more broadly, like every wisdom tradition came from people who didn't see nation states, who saw beyond limited identities to some degree. Like there is Jewish mysticism.
Yes.
There is, a vast body of knowledge and practice and culture of Buddhism and Hinduism and yogic traditions. It's just that what I'm calling for is to go beyond the Western, whitewashed, new age versions of these things, which is very reductive, very limited. Like you think about yoga, people think about asanas and ways to become more flexible. But the part of yoga that is actually like body movements is a tiny fraction of yogic traditions, of what the yoga system of thinking, of philosophy, of nutrition, of ways of being in the world, ways of being in service, ways of doing work, it's vast body of knowledge. But of course, in the West, it was only the part that makes you more slim and sexy that got, and can make a lot of money.
I feel it's also like if you sit, 8 hours in an office, so you need something to, counter, it's many things.
But we also need to acknowledge that this kind of thing that's happening is a result of active, people. These systems are obfuscating our knowledge actively, because this knowledge is dangerous. Like we are talking about now, this knowledge is dangerous to these systems. So we need to acknowledge that the systems are actively obfuscating and distorting this knowledge to protect themselves. And we need to be active in going beyond this obfuscation and distortion, and actively look for the deep, rich and original traditions that were lost in translation.
This is where I see the activism and grounded form of spirituality or faith converge. Is this like living in the paradoxical, nuanced space of how do I move in the world to alleviate suffering and dismantle systems of oppression, because it's the most inherent impulse that I feel by just looking at things and having my heart break. How do I, and at the same time, for a moment, don't buy into yet another made up, arbitrary, limited, approximated identity of the savior or the one who knows the answers, or buy into a particular ism, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like it's living in this space. It's like Ram Dass used to have a beautiful way to speak about it, because he, to me, was a very interesting example of a very spiritual person, a very spiritual teacher, that was also very, very versed in activism his entire life. He had foundations. He worked in all forms of activism and suffering alleviation around the world. It was his entire thing. It was service. And he spoke really eloquently and really beautifully about this space. And he said that it's like you go down the street and you see a hungry person. You don't say, "Oh, wow, that's perfect," right? You feel your heart breaking, or you tell them, you don't say, "Oh, that's perfect," or you suggest them to do some water fasting, right?
Yeah.
You feel your heart breaking and you feed them. And as you are feeding them, you are not buying into the identity that you are the savior feeding this person. You are seeing that both of these things are just roles that both of you have been playing. And maybe this has been happening lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. Maybe he's saving you, right? Like all of these identities kind of melt away, and all that is happening is just love being shared. There's no one saving and no one is being saved. There is just love reciprocating and creating and replicating itself in endless cycle of aliveness. And so I feel like, to me, that's a very beautiful way to see it. Like, as I'm moving forward to advocate for Palestinian liberation, to speak about, you know, I'm even saying I'm an anti-Zionist Jew, so many identities in one in one sentence. But at the same time, I don't buy for a moment that my identity is limited to a leftist, to a Jew, to an anti-Zionist Jew, to, you know, I just see it as both an immediate impulse and inevitable response to my heart breaking open from seeing people suffer. And at the same time, I align my ultimate identity with something that is a lot bigger than what I'm able to comprehend, to not imagine for a second that I can even start to fathom what exactly is happening here and why, you know. And that helps you be a little bit less exhausted and a little bit less righteous and a little bit more compassionate and loving and joyful, you know.
It's helping me now.
Important.
I think, like, so many times, you know, like today we met and I felt so depressed, you know. I felt like I don't, like, I have it a lot, that I wake up and I think immediately about what's going on, and I like, why is this the world that I wake up to, you know? Like, I feel like I want to go back to sleep because I kind of, something in me just rejects this world. Like, and I
then
feel
there is like
so small also against these powers, you know, like, who am I? And now, you know, I'm doing stuff, like I'm talking about it, but nothing feels enough. And I always have this sense of guilt that I'm not doing enough. But on the other hand, I have this despair of, like, it doesn't matter what I do because it's still going on. Like, I wonder what, like, what would you, if you have these things as well, like, and how do you deal with it, like this?
Yeah, I do, because I'm also a human. And I think that what what sparks joy in my life is exactly this spaciousness that and surrender and comfort in the mystery and the unknown that gives me this possibility to act, to witness suffering, and to act with joy. Because it's like this very paradoxical space of seeing the horrific things in front of our eyes and seeing the perfection in them. Not a human perfection, not a justification perfection, just the sheer just existential perfection in the way things are unfolding. Like sometimes I look at things and I'm like, wow, this is so absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
That it's poetic. You know? It's just,
I also have this thing.
It's beyond my, it's so vast, it's so bizarre, it's so wild how all of it came to be that I just can't feel anything but awe.
Yeah.
But this makes me uncomfortable. I will ask a difficult question, okay?
Sure.
Would you be able to say similar things if you were the one in the position of the victim of all this insanity? And like, do you think that maybe it's easier to say it when you are not, because all three of us, let's admit it, all three of us are not in the position of victims of all this insanity. So now we can speak, abstractly about the beauty
I
of
have
it
this
all,
feeling all the time, like I'm sitting here in my comfortable house. Maybe you have it less, because for us, the genocide is happening like an hour drive from here, kind of, from Tel Aviv. How far Gaza is? It's like
90 minutes tops.
And we sit here and we speak about spirituality. And I have it in everything I do now. It's not just about what we're doing now. It's like everything, literally everything that I do, I have this feeling that, and it's like it's eating me. I don't know, like what you say a bit helps me, but Leah, what do you think about like what?
I love this. I love this question. I think it's important. And again, it brings me to this space that is paradoxical in its nature. The first thing that comes to mind is who benefits from you being depressed and lethargic, right? Like ultimately we all acknowledge our privilege that allows us to even be in a space of spiritually exploring things, right? Like that's an established, we need to acknowledge that. And at the same time, what are we doing with this privilege is fundamentally important, because we can look at this privilege and feel deeply guilty and shameful and regret. And we can use this privilege for the benefit of those who are less privileged. And that requires us being alive, feeling joy, feeling love and compassion. And for me, the process, the ways of thinking and the practice that help me feel aliveness and joy and see the poetic beauty in the devastation of the world is what gets me going and continue doing what I do. So I feel like this is the service that I can do. You know what I mean? It's not going to help anybody who is oppressed if I'm going to sit at home and feel depressed about it. And so it's somehow, it's this like, it's very nuanced, very paradoxical space of having our heart break open, acknowledging our privilege, feeling incredibly uncomfortable and in pain, witnessing it happening. And at the same time, cultivating joy, cultivating aliveness, cultivating love in our life, because without it, we can't continue. And so this is where I feel like aligning our actions and beliefs and vision and identity with something greater than what we can comprehend is important, because that's the only thing that helps me move. Because otherwise I'm buying into an identity is like, oh my God, like it's like how do I even have the right to be alive? Like, why am I not stopping it? You know what I mean? So it's a very, I admit, it's not, I'm not always there. It's not about idealism of some sort. It's just about, for me, it's more about a remembrance, like a place to come back to again and again when I feel depressed, when I feel lethargic, when I feel hopeless, is coming back to the place and be like, okay, who is benefiting from me feeling
Yes.
hopeless. Right?
Yes, but I think maybe what I tried to express, and maybe now I can express it more accurately, is that we were talking about these empty spiritualists. And I think that one of the pitfalls is using this kind of argumentation. There is no reason to be sad. There is no reason to, because that doesn't help anyone, but as an excuse to avoid, to separate ourselves from this and to repress it and to avoid thinking about it. And I think that if we really allow ourselves to feel this deep depression about what is going on, to be completely broken and dismantled and go insane with what we are seeing, and also feel the shame. I think this is also a positive emotion in some sense, the shame of me not being the victim. I think this is something, all of these feelings, they have a place. They really have a place, and if we try to repress them, then we can fall to this place of empty spirituality that is a place of privilege and disengagement.
I really love that we are having this nuanced conversations, because I feel like it's really important for all of us right now. And you said something that I believe in really, really deeply. I think that maybe it's another way to showcase the depravity and the disconnect of New Age spirituality, is that it's always busy about making you feel good rather than making you feel more fully. So I think, yes, like any, and maybe this is another way to kind of be discerning and find like grounded spiritual practices and traditions and teachers, is like, does that make me open up even more fully to what exists in the world, to how it makes me feel, to both the sadness and the joy, the depression and the elation, the pain and the pleasure that exists in this life. And yeah, because this is important, right? Like it's in anything that makes us detach or suppress anything that we feel and experience is taking us out of our aliveness in some way. So I'm happy that you said that, because by any means, I don't mean like not feeling, finding ways to avoid sadness or depression or shame or guilt. It's more about opening up to them even farther, embracing them even farther, digesting them fully, and allowing them to come as meaningful action for liberation. And also realize that, you know, things like love and joy and compassion, they are not just feelings, they are states of being. You can feel love and feel sadness and depression. You can feel deep love and feel pain. You can feel joy and have your heart breaking open. You know, like it's like, in speaking of going to the original traditions in Buddhism, to anyone who actually goes and explores, this is one of the foundational things, that you have these like states that you can always tap into, which are equanimity, love, joy, and compassion. It's like spaces that exist within you that you can always tap into, and they can coexist with all of the other human experiences.
Yeah, so maybe what you are saying is that we need to develop the skills of containing the contradiction, like the apparent contradiction and maybe the true contradiction of these two very, for example, these two very contradicting states of love and having our hearts broken and being depressed and desperate. So being able to contain these two things simultaneously is maybe a step in the growth and expansion of our hearts and minds.
Yeah, it's I mean, and this is wisdom that comes from the ecology. If we witness a prosperous ecosystem, death is everywhere.
Yes.
Things are dying and decomposing all the time. And I feel like we can't really collectively do meaningful work to dismantle systems and behaviors that create unnecessary death and destruction before we acknowledge our relationship with natural death and destruction, which we haven't done. you know.
Yes.
Another thing that grounded faith or spiritual wisdom traditions provide that just doesn't exist in, you know, atheistic leftist circles. It's like, you know, contemplating our own mortality in a way that makes us feel even more alive.
Yeah.
And part of that, this aliveness, is acknowledging that every human experience is a form of aliveness, including sadness, including pain, including depression, including shame, including guilt. It's not about manipulating our inner experience into cultivated kind of perfection. It's about opening up to all of it and allowing it to break our heart completely open. And that, to me, is a spiritual experience, you know. And if you look at the ecology, everything feels, you know. We got used to the Darwinistic, deterministic vision of the ecology, in which everything is just like predetermined dead machines. But in actuality, everything is deeply alive. Everything is animated. Everything has spirit. Everything witnesses. Everything feels. You know, everything is looking back at us. And this is not a new vision. This is vision that indigenous and native traditions have always had.
Yes.
And this is what allowed them to engage with this ecology in ways that are regenerative, reciprocal, collective. And so we need some anchorage in spirit in order to move forward in ways that are not just replacing one destructive hierarchical systems with another destructive hierarchical systems, yeah. You know, and also to move around in that transition with joy, yes. You know. I think that one of the most apparent ways in which Eurocentric thinking has colonized our collective mind is in the same way that we have monocultured our outer landscapes into mono-agriculture and dominative hierarchies and concentration of wealth and all of these kind of things. It did the same to our inner landscape in so many ways, which we can touch upon, but one of which is the way in which we prioritize and have dominative hierarchies in our own emotional inner landscape. Like some emotional experiences are better than others. Being, you know, the pursuit of happiness is the epitome of this kind of thing. Like, is happiness is some kind of commodified priority higher than feeling sadness or grief or melancholy or depression, all of these natural things that come out of being alive, and especially living in the world as it's structured right now. And I think one of the ways to break it is to see how not only we can decenter happy feelings and allow ourselves to open to the fullness of our aliveness, but also to notice how pleasure and pain can exist simultaneously. We can feel grief and devastation and depression and feel the joy and reciprocity of gift giving and generosity of life. And I feel that even more strongly right now, as we've seen just more and more devastating images and videos coming out of Gaza, and really feeling it, feeling the, like yesterday, I couldn't stop crying all day. And at the same time, I still felt the aliveness. I still felt the joy of being alive. So, yeah.
Yeah. I also want to add to that, you know, like in the last few days, I was really into, like, I felt really guilty and depressed, and I couldn't do anything. Like, I couldn't post anything. I couldn't share protest, you know. And then the moment I started feeling more like kind of alive and happy, I suddenly, you know, I went to demonstration. It made me feel way more alive because I was surrounded with like people, and there was like energy of like also anger and pain, but also like, yeah, we're together and we're protesting together. We're small because here we're very small, but it felt like we are powerful, like in our energy. And the moment I felt this joy that you talked about, suddenly I posted more stuff and I was back in the game, I felt. But when I was buried in the guilt, in the depression, like I felt like, and then it's kind of this loop. And I wonder if you have also thought about how to get out of this kind of loops, because I felt like guilty that I'm not doing anything and not saying anything, but then I felt more depressed and scared, and it became this vicious cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, go on.
No, I just thinking sometimes I feel like, something maybe I answered myself that I went to the demonstration and, maybe I don't know, like sometimes I feel I will never get out of these cycles, and I guess so. And like what to do? Like, I wonder if you have this as well sometimes, and what do you do to get out of it? Like, or if you have some kind of advice for this kind of situation.
I don't get out of it.
Yes.
It's the only way is through,
Yeah.
It's another way in which we Eurocentric thinking prioritize human intellect over emotional experiences. You can see it all across in the way that we communicate our experience to ourselves, but also with other people, like the whole concept of violent communication in which we impose our own perception of reality onto the person who we are communicating with. Like, you make me feel a certain way, you don't love me, you are so and so, which is emanating from this prioritizing human intellect and the particular narratives that we have onto reality and how we feel. That makes it very hard to touch actual reality, actual feelings, and therefore actual needs. So when I'm feeling, it's not only applicable in our communication with each other, but first and foremost, how we communicate our experiences with ourselves. I feel like a lot of the time the pain that we are experiencing is communicated to each other and to ourselves in these very analytical ways, rather than the actual embracing, feeling, digesting, like the metabolic process of digesting an emotional experience, which is like digesting food. It's taking in forms of aliveness and energy, digesting it and metabolizing it into action, into inspiration, into something meaningful and beneficial. So I just let myself feel. I don't try to get over it, to get past it, to, distract myself or anything. Just feel it fully. And this is where all the gifts are.
Yes. I also have some thoughts about that. Like, I feel that most people around me, and maybe this is part of the problem of what's going on here and in like the Western world in general. Most people around me try to like escape the difficult parts of reality, and they believe that there is some sort of like zero-sum game in which when you don't feel negative emotions, then you will have space to feel the positive emotions. And I feel like this is very misguided and counterproductive. Like, really, like what you said, that when you allow yourself to feel the negative emotions, then there is a certain truth to what is going on, and through seeing this truth, we can act in a way that is connected to reality. And I feel like true liberation can come only through this. And maybe one of my visions, and something that is actually happening to me in the last few months more and more, is that I feel the energy of resistance, right? Because we see all this suffering and all this destruction around us, we can connect to the energy of resistance, and the energy of resistance has a lot of life in it. The energy of being radical, of being a rebel, of fighting against all these negative things that are happening around us. This is true joy. Like, this is the only. I don't know if the only times, but certainly major times when I feel true joy is when I resist the current systems and their oppression.
Yeah. Totally. It's what I would go as far as to say, and I just wrote producing a whole podcast episode about this. I called it the metabolic cycle of liberation, which really, when you look at the biology, unlike the Darwinistic, deterministic kind of vision, which clearly the powers that be absolutely love, because it's all about competition and, you know, fighting over resources and all that shit.
Yeah.
You actually observe what we are slowly discovering now, and what indigenous forms of wisdom that listened to nature knew all along, is that the natural world actually works in these, not only in these cooperative ways, but also that when you observe like a cell, every living being has some struggle for life, some struggle for liberation. And that struggle is inherent in the way that life is being perpetuated. You know, you see it in a rock growing, struggling to grow through a tree, struggling to grow through a rock.
Yes.
You can see it in like a baby being born through like an incredibly painful labor. You can see it through whole galaxies being created from massive explosions. It's all this like metabolic, cosmic metabolic cycles of, you know, identity creation, identity digestion, liberation, and again and again and again. And I think we are just part of that process. And it's easy to get stuck on the small picture of looking at how the world functions and seeing all the very real life devastation that it creates, and forget that we are all being digested in a much bigger cycle of metabolism, just like everything. And so I feel like this for me, it gives me this perspective of like, oh, like the energy that I feel, the lust, the eros that I feel, you know, being turned on for liberation is becoming more in line with my gesture of life. It's what I am. My entire body is an act of resistance against entropy the whole time. It's just made up of an amalgamation, a collection of things, constantly fighting to not completely break down, and eventually they will. You know, my body will age and decompose and become food for the forest again. But now there is resistance. It's all, you know, resisting entropy, resisting. And I feel like I see this poetic, because sometimes everything that happens is so insane that it's so absurd that it's poetic. You know, and I can see how, yeah.
Everything that happens here is super poetic in horrible way, but when you think about like the Zionist story about the victims coming from the Holocaust and doing it to somebody else, and how like
yes, the ironies of history and fascism,
it's crazy.
The collective cell is creating identity and digesting identity, like this Zionist identity, just like the sapien identity, is something hierarchically separated from the rest of nature, are being now actively digested. Like the collective cell is digesting this idea of identity and nation state and, you know, sapiens and humans, and we are digesting that and metabolizing that and shitting it back into the ground as nutrient, you know. And so
I really love the way that you can present things that recently I could not see as anything other than horrible, in a way that gives me a glimmer of hope. So really, thank you for
when
that.
you said we did an episode in our podcast that you describe how like what happened in the 7th of October and the party, that it's some kind of a weird movie, like yes, the way things happen have this meaning into them, that it's horrific because it's real, but you still, if you're aware enough, you can kind of spot it, I think. But,
yes, and maybe then you can find your place in it when you understand how these structures work. Then your place in it becomes more natural and more I don't know, synergetic.
Emergent. You said beautifully, synergy, because it's again like this evolutionary metaphor. It's like everything is forces of attraction, erotically being pulled to each other to create more new relationships of synergy, which creates and from life emerges from. And in our experience is the same. Like, look how we all came together with incredible solidarity and beautiful organization in ways that we haven't seen before historically, not around Palestine issues, but not around anything. And, you know, these new relationships of synergy create a new emergence. And then each of us find our own unique place in it, our own voice in it, our own cause. And together new life emerges, new world, new systems, and it's something that is far beyond our own little lifespan. Like we are planting trees that are going to feed people generations to come.
Yeah, so maybe this is a good point to reach the other subject that we wanted. You want to raise this subject?
Yeah, and yeah, I also thought that I thought about the subject of like liberation, and you talk about this resistance, that it's part of the struggle, and resistance is part of life. But like I feel that this what happens now, like with Zionism and Palestine and this genocide, that it's a wake-up call to how the system operates, not just here, like everywhere. And like to me, the question that arises all the time is what makes this horror possible? Because it's not about, I think many people reach the realization that it's not about human nature. It's not that like people are evil, so they do genocide. It's like there is a system that makes certain people be able to do it. And
that serves other people and
yeah,
is maintained by people who want power and who want to gain more wealth.
Yeah. And I saw you posted, and then I saw you posted something about the no state solution, and I really liked it. And I think both of us identify as anarchists, and
yeah, we almost called the podcast no state solution instead
Yeah.
of one state solution.
Yeah,
And,
amazing.
Yeah.
And then I thought, like, what are we? And I think many people, like especially Israelis, who became like anti-Zionist, like Zionism is so strong, and the moment like you liberate yourself from that, so suddenly everything. So why to think about nation states? Why to think, everything becomes open in a sense.
Yep.
And I wanted to maybe ask you or open the conversation, how do we don't stop here in this, subject of like decolonizing Palestine and all that? And I feel like there is a missing piece to me when I think about it, like how do we make this world that these things cannot happen, that people don't have the power to do it? And because yeah, I wonder like what's your take on that?
I think that you said beautifully, it is like once you wake up from Zionism, like everything is up for grabs. I feel the same about many other like spiritual awakenings that I've had throughout my life. Like when you suddenly get a vivid experience that your entire egocentric sense of self is a made up construct, suspended something somewhere in the middle of space-time that has no direct experiential like it's nothing.
Yeah.
And then everything is like, oh wow, is this thought real? Is this thing like you suddenly wake up, it's like a snowball. I think it's the same about Zionism, which is interesting considering the response that I often get from it. Interestingly enough, and not surprising to me, I haven't interacted with one single Palestinian that was opposing that. I can't generalize on the whole Palestinian people. There are different people with different factions, different ideas and beliefs, whatever. But like at least the people in my circles, at least the people in my comment sections, the people that I interact with, my friends from Palestine, all are totally in line with it. And I feel like there is something intuitive, consciously or not, intuitive in the indigenous people that is inherently anarchical without necessarily labeling it as an anarchy, which is something a lot of us from the West have a hard time with, because anarchy itself is a Eurocentric label to something that existed for millennia before European colonialism.
Yes, states are a new concept. We have to realize that states have been around for maybe a few centuries, right?
People just live in alignment with nature. Then the way nature works is anarchical, period. And this is why it functions better. It fulfills the needs of the whole better. It is more liberatory. It is more regenerative as far as the ecosystem go, because it's just how nature functions. There are no hierarchies of domination in the natural process.
Yeah, it seems somehow a forest works together, even though there's no planner who tells everyone what to do, and it's one system.
Yeah. And the struggle for life still exists, and death still exists, and suffering still exists. Nevertheless, it's anarchical and, you know, horizontal structures of you know, egalitarian, mutual, gift-giving reciprocity. And the only people who had a problem with this were Americans, who are definitely in the struggle for Palestinian liberation, but haven't yet began to conceptualize a world with no nation states. They are still they may be in agreement in conceptually, hypothetically, they agree with like, yeah, I want a world without borders, without everything, but they are so, in some ways, still like bought into and indoctrinated into the idea of nation state. It's hard to, as much as they resist it, it's hard to even conceptualize a world without it. So they are like, no, first we need to make a one state solution, and then we can do anarchy. And I'm like, no, you know, there was anarchical egalitarian structure before the Zionist project in Palestine, or at least something that resemble an anarchical, you know, horizontal, decentralized system. The reason why the Zionist project had such a hard time acquiring land in Palestine, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the wake of 48, they had just a fraction of the land, even though they had the resources and they tried to buy it all. It's because it was impossible. The land was not belong to one, it wasn't privatized yet. So, you know, every time you want to buy a piece of land, you need to not only go to the person who is, you know, in charge of the land, but also all the falahi, all the farmers who live on the land, who have a say in what's happening with that land. And so you had political structures of like villages who governed themselves, and then like groups of villages in different areas of Palestine. And that was pretty non-state anarchical. Even during the Ottoman Empire was not nationalistic in its nature, like the British Mandate, or you know, it was very much Palestine as on decentralized collection of peoples. So yeah, I mean, to me, it just makes total sense to speak about what do we actually want to create, and not because because neither of us is like has the authority to assert. It's not it's not my idea. You know.
Yes, if we do it, it's counterproductive to what we're trying to do, right? If we try to force this some kind of idea from above, it's anti-anarchical, right?
Exactly.
So you can't do it.
Exactly. Yeah, and this is what people find it hard to. How can you say that what the Palestinians? No, I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying like, hey, here's what naturally emerges when there is no state, you know. But yeah.
So what you're saying now connects to some thoughts that have been going through my mind for quite a long time now, and I don't know how to phrase the question, so let me just try. So I think about humanity, okay? And I think about like humanity not against, but as opposed to nature. And this is something that we've been taught to think, that there is nature, and then there are things that are unnatural, things that are human creations.
Civilization versus nature.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And more, so first of all, I think of human supremacy. And as someone who is vegan, but vegan in a way that I think is like more broad than just not consuming meat and animal products. To me, vegan means that I'm against human supremacy. And I also had like this inversion in my mind in the last year or two, that it's not just that I'm against human supremacy. In some sense, I see humanity as a virus on the planet. I see like humanity destroying the planet around me, and like destroying other species, and taking advantage of other species, and enslaving other species, and enslaving nature in general. And now bringing the climate crisis, which is like these things. And I start wondering, where does this virus come from? Like, what is the origin of this virus? And now you gave like this new direction. Maybe the origin of this virus is like the West, or like, I don't know, like I don't know, white supremacist culture. I don't know what it is exactly. And it's hard for me to put my finger on what the origin of this is. And then it's hard for me to put my finger on where we should focus our efforts. So I was wondering, how do you think about this question? Do you agree with my analysis? Do you have some other thoughts?
It's interesting because it's literally the last piece that I wrote and is now in production. It's going to be released in the next couple of days. So
we are in
the,
sync.
the question was like, okay, we get that every single devastation we see right now originates in the human supremacy over nature. But why?
Yes.
Out of the more the quintillion species who've traversed this earth, why humans have become so separated? And I started exploring this from different perspectives, you know, all the our competitive Darwinistic view of nature, the evolution of consciousness and a sense of self, game theory, the invention of certain technologies like tilling the land with the bull that suddenly got us into this paradigm of oppressing another species in order to extract exclusive benefit from it, and a bunch of other things. And I think all of them are, you know, different lenses and perceptions to look at the same reality. But ultimately, what I was looking for is something a lot more poetic that helps me not just arbitrarily understand why, but reimagine something else, like engage in this inspiring, life-creating process. And this is where I got to this whole metabolic, you know, kind of analogy. And, you know, ultimately, I don't have any particular answers, and I don't think answers are necessarily what's important. I think that finding our place in it, or rediscovering our place in it, is what's important. And what is our place in it is just like everything else. Organisms, animals of feelings and needs engaging in life co-creation. And it's a vision that places us not as a virus that is here to destroy everything, neither as an inherently non-violent, you know, some kind of angels.
Yeah.
But rather very much part of the metabolic cycle. Because if we are also being digested and eventually go extinct and die like everything else, then what is left to do other than play, become part, become stewards, and be stewards by the ecology? Come back to play in this life-creating, life-affirming, death-affirming process of aliveness. And I think we got detached from it, not just in the human supremacy over nature, but in many other ways. You know, one of the kind of reasons for this anthropomorphic human experience that I was exploring is what Ernest Becker does in The Denial of Death, talking about how human motivation and human condition is so largely influenced by our denial of our own mortality.
Yeah.
And he claims that humans are the only ones contemplating their death, but I spoke about how it's not true because, you know, elephants, chimpanzees, magpies, they also bury their dead. They also mourn their dead. But I think what is different with humans is that we have somehow demonized death to the point that it's inherently something bad. And when we see that, it's very hard to work towards creating or rather eradicating unnecessary destruction and death, because we haven't even come to terms with the fact of our natural mortality, right? We haven't even
all the destruction and the killing and genocide and all that stuff, in a way it's a symptom of not accepting our own death. Like,
I think in many ways, not just the ultimate death, our own mortality, but also the continuous metabolic process of identity creation, identity assertion, and identity death that we constantly go through, like every other organism. And then we can't, like, we hold on to dear life. You see it in like billionaires trying to live forever, go on to another planet. You see it in like how we compartmentalized and sterilized the experience of death and dying. And how can we start to even having a relationship with this utter unnecessary destruction and death that we are seeing, when we haven't even come to terms with what is death affirming, like actually having a relationship with death. Like what is death that is exciting, that is natural, that is inspiring cycle,
Yeah, it makes me also think like what you said now, like that I think in a way this clinging to Zionism and this identity that's like it's not allowing it to turn into something new. Like many people ask me, what, do you want to destroy everything we built here? And it's like, I don't want to destroy, just, there's something called
digest and shit it out.
Yeah, and change. It's not that Hebrew and culture is going to disappear, or it just has to shift into something else. And yes, some things have to die, but some are going.
Identities are always shifting, right? Like I take a breath in from the pure oxygen that the plants have filtered. I exhale out, and they, it becomes food for them to flourish with. And I eat food in, that food becomes part of my identity, and then nutrients comes out of my body back into the soil and become nutrients for other things. So where is the identity stops here exactly? It's more of like an interwoven process that never ends, and I think that's no, we just get stuck on like one central identity, and this is where the separation starts. Whether it's our own egocentric sense of self as a separated thing, whether it's even looking at nature, seeing it as like, you see biologists in the life sciences looking at it's almost frowned upon to think about biology in poetic ways, or examine beauty and aesthetics, which is fun in and of itself, because Darwin itself, that the darling of the life studies, has refuted his own work and wrote extensively and rather poetically and later in life about beauty and aesthetics and things that don't have utility in the biological process. When they are the biological process, that is the very it is poetic. Like there is no other way to really separate the objective from the subjective. They are the same thing.
I want to ask, I see, like, let's go back to something super concrete, like the Zionists, okay? But as an example for like all of fascism, okay? Like, I see them holding on to something, like really holding on for it, to it tight. And I wonder, why do they do this? And like, how do we, like, when you see someone do it, we see this all the time. We see them holding on, and I personally don't know how to speak to them, and I don't know how to help them see from outside this holding on, and how it's like stopping all the processes and just creating all the problems. So like, why does this happen, and how do we help them release?
It's like being constipated, right? Like, or have some digestive problems, But what happens when there is a digestive, like something or someone or group of things in the ecology are having some digestive problems, like a cancerous cell, or kind of like a harmful species that is taking over or making a tree sick or something. I think the ecology comes together to help that digestive process continues. And also in our own bodies, when there is like a intensified sense of suffering, it can help us remember and see how we are holding on to a particular perception of reality, to a particular arbitrary aspect of ourselves that is ready and wanting to be digested and let go. How do we approach it? I think it's moment to moment thing. I feel like for me, like part of my process was letting go and digesting my identity of superiority over Zionists or people who are currently stuck on a particular identity, and not seeing myself as somehow more advanced or hierarchically higher, but rather just coming from a different vantage point that is maybe more holistic, more in tune, more, in line with my environment. But nevertheless, like the attitude for me, like it's still like I'm not going to engage if there is no reciprocity. But when I do engage, I try to touch not the surface level identity politics, but rather something a bit deeper. Like, what are you actually experiencing? What are you actually feeling? And it's something very hard. And it's something that I don't expect the people who are currently oppressed to be engaging with, because they are busy surviving and resisting. But it's part of our work, those of us who feel that they have, and in moments that we feel that we have the emotional capacity, the emotional ability to hold on something that is drastically different than the way that we see the world, and hold it with love, like really with love, not the transactional conditional love of I'm here to love you just as long as you are loving in the way that I think love should behave. I'm here to love you fully, and I want to know what is your human experience. I'm going to stop you with my body from causing harm, because that's just what my love tells me to do. But as long as we are sitting here on the couch and you're not murdering anybody, I want to have these conversations with you on a human level. Like, what are you actually experiencing? Like, these people are deeply hurting, They are afraid, they are hurting, they are feeling ostracized, and none of this is justification for anything.
Yeah.
But it's also just a realization of where we're at. And I think if we are unable as a collective to hold the oppressor in our liberation work, like include them in our solutions, include them in our world building, we are just as bad as the oppressor. Yes. We are just as bad as the colonizer, because we are doing the exact same us versus them separative kind of thing. So it's really something that I'm still coming to terms with and constantly like thinking about. But at least as far as like ideally or role models that I'm looking at, I'm like, okay, how can all of this exist together? How can I stop oppression with my body and hold the oppressor, like seeing through their false identity, even though they center their entire existence around that identity, but seeing through it? Because what I'm seeing really is another organism, another animal with needing and feeling and pain and hurt, just like me, just like everybody else. There is no difference. Like, they are not Zionists. They are human animals buying into Zionism, right? Like, it's a made up identity. Yeah.
So this makes me think of my own experience, and I know that, so I know that as someone who was born into this society of Zionism, into this what we call a cult, and I know that from a young age I felt very rejected and attacked at the same time by this society all the time, because something in me always resisted it. And still, and especially now even, I feel like because fascism is all around us all the time, and I feel like I need to protect myself all the time from this society that's surrounding me. And there is some truth to it, right? Some objective truth, because the police might arrest us for what we are doing, living here, right? And people in this neighborhood where Elik lives and we are recording this episode from.
Wow, they will want to kill me.
Yeah.
Yeah, they will hear about what's going on here and now.
Yeah, if the contents of this conversation gets out to like a radius of, let's say, 200 meters from this apartment, so many people will stand in line to kill us, right? So it's scary. It's scary, and it makes me very stressed.
Because for them, I'm doing something that's bringing about their death.
Yes.
Maybe in some way, So,
yes. Like, so how do you like keep how do you keep resisting and holding love and like and not opening yourself to the danger of these people who really would like to destroy you as well.
And I have yesterday I was in demonstration here, and there are always these people who stand on the other side of the street and like לכו לעזה, תמותו, like go to Gaza, there's this, and I really sometimes just want to go and just put myself, like this. Come on, let's talk. What do you want to say? I don't have the courage to do it, but
yeah.
But I wonder if there's a way to kind of come and disarm yourself. And I'm too scared to do it, but I feel it could be powerful, but I don't know. It's hard. Yeah.
I have to say, I have a very deep and tremendous appreciation and respect for people who, like you, who remained at the belly of the beast. I left many years ago when my nervous system just couldn't hold it. I noticed that I get sick often. Every time I go to Israel, I feel physically ill, which never happens outside of it. I don't remember when's the last time I was sick. Like, I'm in vibrant health. But
I'm jealous. I'm
to
genuinely jealous when you tell me this because I feel the same, but I feel it now, and some part of me fantasizes about the moment that I say fuck all of this and leave and just not feel all this pain all the time. But please continue.
No, I totally, like, I have nothing but appreciation and great respect for people who are there doing the work, because I mean, I know that I would be next to you if I was there, but my life years ago, like more than 12 years ago, took me to a different place, and I guess I have different work to do in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe one day I will find myself back.
Well, to a free Palestine when you come.
Yes, come to a free Palestine, please.
Amen. I had a vision about it one time. I was in a ceremony with some abuelo here, and in the middle of this sweat lodge ceremony that we did together, I just fell into a dream state vision, which I saw my death. I saw myself dying as an old person, being buried, and a tree, and an olive tree is being planted where I died, in a mountain in Jerusalem, where I was born, in a free Palestine. I don't know if this is a vision that's gonna materialize into actual reality, or is it just an inspired vision for someone in my kin that is going to experience this. I don't know, but I really, I'm saying all of this and just like my appreciation and respect to you, because I want this to be the foundation of what I'm about to say. Like, I'm not speaking from the same living experience. I'm enjoying a certain privilege that you guys currently aren't. The only thing that I think I could add to this conversation, besides like, holding your hand and being like, this is so important, like, please keep doing it, it's like, this is just the best thing that you can do right now, is that maybe it's not about perfection, but just an ongoing moment-to-moment practice. It's not about how am I constantly showing up in the perfect way, whatever that means, but more like, how do I engage in this process in a way that is mutually transforming? It's not just adding into the conversation, adding into the resistance, adding into the communal, but also like transforming me as I engage in it. So it's going to look like in all kinds of different creative ways, but the important thing is we align ourselves with the highest value we can imagine. So ultimately, the practice is about resisting and holding love for the oppressor. How does that, how exactly does it look like? I don't know. It's going to change, it's going to transform, but it's going to take you to every day to a new place. And maybe one day you will find yourself disarming and, standing in front of being like, hey, let's have a conversation. you know.
Maybe we should do that.
Um,
Maybe yeah.
You know, like really like putting it into context, like a lot of people talk about killing, you know, people like you, but the majority of people will not actually go about and kill someone. They just, it's the same identity creation, identity constipation, stuckness.
Yeah,
unless
speaks,
they're put
right?
in
Like
uniforms and told to do so by their state. But,
yes, yes.
Yeah, and even
wouldn't
then,
do
like
it out of their own will, let's say.
and even then, the currently as it stands, the police and the army haven't killed any Israelis in that
Yes.
in that struggle. So, you know, I think using this relative safety or protection that you have, not because you just because your skin color is different and you were born on one side of the equation, but for them it's a very real thing. So you have this kind of protectiveness. Even if you get arrested, it's not like your entire life is being you know, ruined. And if anything, it can contribute to your resistance because you go out and you publicize it and you speak about it in, you know, everywhere. And it's like, it's mobilizing the resistance. So the only thing really is to open up to this vulnerability, really, like, you know, approaching them with, a genuine broken, you know, and whenever there is an opening, whenever there is someone who is like, okay, you know what, let's have a talk. Yeah, I don't know. It's
I want to say,
I think you can teach me a lot more about it than I can teach you, you know.
You're really giving me inspiration now, and I think this is the advantage of us being here and you being there. You can look from outside and help us see things that is more difficult to see from the inside, but then we are here and we can do some stuff, like in the physical world. And you really are giving me inspiration to maybe we can initiate something like where we come to a protest and a counter protest and just come to people and like really engage with them in a very direct and honest way, and maybe record this and put it on television, like on our channel. Maybe do it not recorded, because then it's like two completely different things.
That a lot of time that when we do it, it's kind of this energy of let's show the world how racist and horrible Israelis are. So not from this point.
Not from this point. No, to really talk and to really ask them, how do you feel? And we should think about how we do this, because this is something that I've never seen done before. So if it's something new, then we should try it, because, well, we need to try something here, right? Because the situation is really bad.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the same experience like in the streets, although like I have been to protests and I'm going back to Berlin soon for a few months for many reasons, but one of them is because I do want to be in a place in which protests are happening, and I feel like Germany is an important place to be in with the this like insane support of Israel and this like bizarre relationship with anti-Semitism. And so I'm really looking forward to being able to, with my body, do more physical things. But yeah, I mean, like there is something disarming and kind of cognitively, like a cognitive slap almost, when you approach someone who is coming at you with like a fist, and you approach them with like an open arms, like, hey, let's hug, you know, like it's just like computer error, you know, like it just can't continue with the same thing. Like you're like, hey, you know, I really genuinely love you. Like I let's have a conversation, you know. And maybe it will be different. It will foster different reactions. It will be different for different people. And I think expecting that it will work out in a particular way is unrealistic. But think about it from this perspective. If each one of us in this resistance, throughout the span of our life, will manage to turn one nationalist, Zionist, Nazi, whatever, into more loving, ecological, you know, collective expression, that's incredible. That we just doubled our ranks, and that's it.
I wish I could do it.
Yeah, there's the expression.
I think you are. I think you are already doing it. Like you're planting seeds, and people that you don't even know see your stuff, and like having conversations, and it opens something up. And maybe a few years down the line, like
maybe this conversation, who knows?
Yeah, we don't see the fruits of our action, and that's the beauty of it. Like a few days ago, while what was happening in Rafah was happening, I was planting trees all day. And I thought about how, like, I'm going to enjoy these trees, but I'm probably not going to be alive to see them fully mature and big and full of, like, you know, something else, somebody else will.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, like, I'm not just doing it for myself. It's the mycelium and the bugs and the birds and, you know, the atmosphere, the water allocation and all of these things. Like, it's just a vibrant participatory gesture of life that is just our nature. Like, you have no choice other than being that you are, you know. And so other than keep playing and keep reinventing it, rather than buying into the same structure of limited identity of I am activist, I am anarchist, I am here to save the world and the world is bad and we are a virus, we let that kind of be digested as well, and we keep reimagining, being re-inspired into the ways that we are doing it. And I feel like it's happening to me a lot. Like, the beginning, I was like really militant with Zionists. I was like, sometimes they say so idiotic things that it's like, how to say in Hebrew, marim leanchata. It's bringing it up for a slap, you know?
Yeah.
And slowly and surely, and also obviously by engaging with other people who are having different approach to this, and I'm like, okay, let's engage in different ways, you know, even if they don't immediately react or change their views. It's planting a seed. It's like, oh, actually, this person who is advocating for a free Palestine doesn't want to annihilate me.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's going to open up something, and a few years down the line, they will be next to you in a protest. Who knows, you know?
Yeah. I wish sometimes, like, because of what I'm doing, I have like I'm starting to talk more to Palestinians, and I feel like if like my friends could talk to them, it would just erase it in a second. But I know that if they could talk, they find ways to, you know. But I find a lot of time that they have, I think because of their position, they kind of see the full picture.
Yeah, they have to.
And a lot of time they have more compassion than me. Like, they tell me, like, you should be patient with your parents, you know, and stuff like this, that I'm like, yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean,
the expression I wanted to quote a few moments ago is an expression in Hebrew, כל המציל נפש אחת כאילו הצילו עולם ומלואו. So I will try to translate it. He who saves one soul saves the entire world. So I feel like this is very relevant here in even more ways than I thought to begin with. Like, we need to look at like each person that we converse with as an entire world, and respect their
and also we let go of our own limited identities so we can become a space, not just a person. We can become a space for people to arrive at and feel nourished, not just our comrades in the revolution, but also like everybody else, you know. I'm very much in the process of practicing this, and like, you know, and like any practice, we try, we fail, we get the, you know.
Yes, it's all a spiral.
Courage to go again. Yeah, it's a practice. We get better at it with time, with practice.
Okay, so I feel like this is a good place to end.
Wrap it up.
To wrap up this part of our conversation, which I have a strong faith that will continue. This forum is, I feel, very productive, and well, I already feel better.
Me too. It really helped me to connect worlds, kind of like this conversation with you, I think. Yeah, about like the activism and the spiritual practice and all this stuff that kind of I felt like, you know, this is here and this is there, and I don't know how to, you know, and like
to integrate.
Yeah, I feel it's really helped to integrate.
So before we wrap it up, if you have like final comments, Yuval?
Yeah, I
Put you on
mean,
the spot.
sit on the grass, take a breath in from the grass, exhale and food back to the grass, and remember that nature is a gift-giving, perpetual reciprocity. And our place in it is just as such. And what happens? What happens? We remember that. What happens to the way we do work? What happens to the way we have relationships and make love? What happens to the way we do activism? What happens to the way that we do spiritual work? When we remember that, when we come to each moment remembering our mortality, remembering reciprocity, and bring the fullness of our love, the fullness of our gifts to each moment, expecting nothing in return, and giving thanks for the gift of life that we constantly receive. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so thank you so much, Yuval, for a fascinating and deep and enriching conversation. And thank you to all the audience for keeping up with us so far. And we know each episode is becoming longer and longer in this podcast, but let's hope that that it's engaging enough to justify the long episodes. So, Elik, any final remarks?
No, just thank you for this. Thank you. Thank you for your work in general. Like, I found your videos like really helped me to, I told you at the beginning, to find it in myself to start to speak up. So I think you're doing very important work. So
Okay, so thank you so much, and bye everybody, and peace and justice for all.
yeah.